The city skyline gleamed in the morning sun, its glass towers reflecting streaks of gold across busy streets below. Cars honked, delivery trucks rumbled, and pedestrians hurried to their destinations, clutching coffee cups as though caffeine was the fuel that kept the city alive. Inside one of those towers stood the headquarters of Harrison and Cole Industries, a respected firm known for its integrity and innovation. At the top of the company sat Richard Harrison, a CEO whose name commanded respect not only because of his wealth, but because of his humanity. Unlike many leaders in the corporate world, Richard was known for being approachable. He wasn't the kind of CEO who hid behind boardroom walls. He walked the halls, shook hands with employees, and remembered the names of their children. But this story isn't about Richard's leadership alone. It's about a single mistake. A mistake that could have destroyed someone's career, and how Richard chose to respond in a way no one expected. The beloved employee at the heart of this story was Emily Carter, a project manager in her early 30s. Emily had worked at Harrison & Cole for almost a decade, climbing the ranks with quiet determination. She wasn't flashy, she wasn't political, but she had something far more valuable: loyalty. She treated every project as if the company were her own. Co-workers admired her work ethic and kindness. New hires found a mentor in her. Supervisors found reliability. Even the clients trusted her, often calling her directly rather than going through official channels. To many, Emily was the soul of the department. But even the most dependable people make mistakes. And Emily's mistake was enormous. It all began with a contract. Harrison & Cole had just landed a multi-million-dollar partnership with a European tech company, a deal that could open global doors. Emily was assigned to oversee the transition, handling sensitive negotiations and ensuring that timelines were met. For weeks, she worked late nights, cross-checking documents, triple verifying numbers, and responding to emails at ungodly hours. But exhaustion does strange things to the human mind. One Friday evening, after nearly 12 hours at her desk, Emily reviewed a set of financial documents for the contract. She adjusted a figure, believing she was correcting a clerical error. She saved the file, sent it to the client, and shut down her computer with a sigh of relief. What she didn't realize was that her correction introduced a catastrophic error. The decimal point had shifted. A deal worth millions suddenly appeared undervalued by nearly $10 million. By Monday morning, chaos erupted. Emails flooded the office. The client was confused, their lawyers alarmed. The finance department scrambled to explain what had happened. Within hours, whispers spread through the office halls. Who messed this up? Emily's stomach dropped when she realized her mistake. She opened her laptop and stared at the file. The decimal point stared back, mocking her. Her chest tightened. She felt the blood drain from her face. She had always been the one people could count on. The one who caught mistakes, not made them. Now she had endangered the company's reputation and potentially jeopardized a deal that could define Harrison & Cole's future. That afternoon, she was called into a meeting with the executive board. She walked down the hallway with trembling hands, each step echoing in her ears like a drumbeat of doom. Co-workers avoided her eyes, though not out of judgment, more out of pity. Everyone knew Emily. Everyone liked her. But everyone also knew that mistakes at this level rarely ended with forgiveness. Inside the boardroom, the air was heavy. A dozen executives sat around the long mahogany table, their expressions grave. At the head sat Richard Harrison himself, his silver hair catching the sunlight streaming through tall windows. Emily's voice quivered as she admitted her error. I sent the wrong version of the file. I didn't notice the decimal placement. This was my responsibility, and I accept full accountability. Silence followed. The CFO cleared his throat. Do you realize the magnitude of this error? We could lose this partnership. The client could walk away. Years of negotiations gone. Emily nodded, tears pricking her eyes. Yes, I understand. The head of legal leaned forward. Mistakes like this can't happen. Not at this level. Not on deals this big. Whispers rippled around the table. Words like termination and liability floated through the air. Emily braced herself. She knew what was coming. But then Richard Harrison raised his hand, and the room fell silent. He looked at Emily, not with anger, but with something far more piercing, thoughtfulness. "Emily," he said softly, "you've worked with us for nearly 10 years. I've watched you pour yourself into this company. You've saved us from more disasters than I can count. Tell me, when was the last time you made a mistake like this?" Emily swallowed hard. "Never. Not of this scale." Richard leaned back his chair, folding his hands. "Exactly. Which means this isn't carelessness. It's exhaustion." The board exchanged uneasy glances. Richard continued, "We ask our people to give everything to this company. Their time, their energy, their nights, their weekends. And Emily has given more than most. This mistake isn't a reflection of incompetence. It's a reflection of a system that pushes people to the brink." Emily's eyes widened. She hadn't expected this. Richard turned to the board. "If we punish Emily by firing her, what message does that send? That loyalty means nothing? That one slip erases years of dedication? No, I won't allow that." Gasps echoed around the room. Some executives protested. "Richard, this could cost us millions. Shareholders won't accept." But Richard silenced them with a firm voice. "What costs us more in the long run? Losing money or losing trust? If we abandon the very people who built this company, then we've already lost." He turned back to Emily. His expression softened. "You'll fix this. You'll work with finance and legal to renegotiate. I trust you. But from this day forward, I'm implementing a new policy. No employee works past 7 p.m. No employee answers emails after hours. We will protect the people who protect this company." Emily's tears spilled over. Relief and disbelief collided in her chest. She had expected the end of her career. Instead, she was being given not only a second chance, but the chance to change the culture of the entire company. And that was only the beginning of the story. The meeting adjourned in stunned silence. Executives shuffled out of the room, whispering to one another, clearly divided. Some respected Richard's decision. Others thought he had lost his grip on reality. But there was no mistaking it, his word was final. Emily remained seated, still trembling, still processing what had just happened. She had walked into that room, ready to pack up her desk and walk away in shame. Instead, the CEO himself had stood in her corner. Richard rose from his chair, walked over, and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Go home, Emily," he said gently. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow we start fixing this. Together." For the first time in hours, Emily managed to smile through her tears. "Thank you, sir. I don't know how to repay this." "You already have," Richard replied. "You gave us 10 years of loyalty. That means more than you realize." That night, Emily sat on her couch with a blanket wrapped around her, the glow of the city lights flickering through her apartment windows. Normally, she would have been buried in her laptop, reviewing documents, double-checking numbers, preparing for the next day. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel the crushing weight of that obligation. Richard had told her to rest, and she finally allowed herself to obey. The next morning, a new kind of energy flowed through the office. News of Richard's decision had spread like wildfire. Employees couldn't believe it. Most of them had grown accustomed to the harsh reality of the corporate world. One mistake could erase years of good service. Yet here was a CEO breaking that unspoken rule. Some called it foolish. Others called it revolutionary. When Emily walked into the office from HR, "You deserve this chance," Emily felt something she hadn't felt in days: hope. But her work wasn't over. The decimal error had still caused chaos. The European partners were demanding clarity. Some of them were already doubting Harrison and Cole's competence. Emily had to face the storm head-on. She gathered the finance and legal teams into a conference room. The mood was tense. Everyone was on edge. "Listen," she began, her voice steady though her hands trembled slightly. "This mistake was mine. I won't run from it. But Richard has entrusted us to make it right, and I believe we can." The room fell silent. The head of finance, a stern man named Daniel, sighed and nodded. "We'll back you, Emily. Let's start with a correction memo to the client. We'll explain as a clerical oversight, but reaffirm the integrity of the overall deal." Over the next few days, Emily worked tirelessly. This time, she didn't stay past midnight. She followed the new policy Richard had put in place. At 7 p.m., she shut down her laptop. At 7:15, she was home, and something remarkable happened. Her work became sharper. Her mind was clearer. By the end of the week, Emily and her team had successfully renegotiated the deal. The European partners, though initially skeptical, were impressed by the company's honesty and correction. They signed a revised contract. The partnership was saved. When the announcement came, the entire office erupted in applause. Emily was hailed a hero, not because she had been perfect, because she had been resilient. Richard called her into his office later that day. His office wasn't the cold, sterile type one might expect from a CEO. It was warm, with family photos on the shelves, books stacked on the desk. He motioned for her to sit. "You did well, Emily," he said with a proud smile. Emily exhaled, finally allowing herself to relax. "I thought I'd ruined everything." "You proved something far more valuable," Richard replied. "You showed that mistakes don't define us, how we respond to them does. And you reminded this company why humanity must always come before profit." Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. "You didn't just save my job, sir. You saved me." Richard's eyes softened. "No, Emily, you saved us. This company needed a wake-up call, and you gave it one." Word of Richard's decision spread far beyond the walls of Harrison & Cole. Business journals picked up the story. Articles titled, "The CEO Who Forgave a $10 million Mistake" began circulating online. Some praised him as a visionary leader. Others mocked him as naive. But inside the company, something undeniable had shifted. Employees no longer dragged themselves into work with dread. They felt valued. They felt safe. Productivity soared, not out of fear, but out of loyalty. And for Emily, everything changed. She became more than just a project manager. She became a symbol, a reminder that even in the cutthroat world of business, compassion still had a place. But the story didn't end there, because not everyone was happy with Richard's choice. Among the executives, whispers of discontent grew louder. To some of them, Richard's decision had set a dangerous precedent. If one employee could survive such a mistake, what would stop others from being careless? What would shareholders think? One executive in particular, the CFO, began plotting quietly. And soon, Emily would find herself in the middle of another storm, one even bigger than before. The glow of victory didn't last long. Though the partnership had been salvaged and morale across the company was higher than ever, cracks began to form in the foundation of leadership. Not everyone celebrated Richard's choice to protect Emily. For some, it was a dangerous gamble. No one voiced this more strongly than Gregory Lane, the company's chief financial officer. A man of rigid discipline and ironclad rules, Gregory had built his reputation on numbers, not people. To him, the bottom line was the only measure of success. He watched from the sidelines as Richard implemented his new human-first policies. No work after 7 p.m., mandatory weekends off, flexible schedules for parents. Gregory saw productivity rise, but his eyes focused on something else, the quarterly reports. Margins were thinner than he liked. Profits, while still healthy, had dipped slightly during the transition. To Gregory, this was proof that Richard's compassion was costing them. One evening, long after most employees had gone home, Gregory remained in his office, the city lights glowing outside his window. He leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against his desk, his mind running through calculations and scenarios. "This company isn't a charity," he muttered to himself. "It's a business. And if Richard won't protect it, someone else will." The next morning, whispers circulated among the upper floors. Gregory had called for an emergency meeting with select board members, a meeting Emily was not invited to. Inside that closed-door session, Gregory spoke with fire in his voice. Richard's decision was reckless. He spared one employee at the cost of our reputation. What if investors lose faith? What if this kindness becomes a liability? We cannot build a corporation on sentimentality. Some board members nodded in agreement, uneasily shifting in their seats. Others hesitated, torn between admiration for Richard's principles and fear of financial fallout. But Emily had no knowledge of these conversations. She was too busy pouring herself into her work, determined to prove Richard right. She arrived each morning with renewed focus, leading her team with quiet strength. She no longer felt like she was walking on eggshells. She felt trusted, and that trust fueled her. One afternoon, as she reviewed a new proposal, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number. "Watch your back. Some people don't want you here." Her breath caught in her throat. She looked around the office, but nothing seemed out of place. Still, unease settled over her like a shadow. Later that week, she was unexpectedly called into another board meeting. This time, the atmosphere was different, colder. Gregory sat at the table, his arms crossed, his gaze sharp as a blade. Richard sat at the head, his expression unreadable. "Emily," Gregory began, his tone clipped, "we've reviewed recent performance. While your efforts to correct the contract error are acknowledged, concerns remain about accountability. Some of us believe it sets a poor precedent to allow such a mistake to go unpunished." Emily's heart pounded. "With respect, sir, I've done everything in my power to correct the situation. The deal was saved, and our partners remain committed." Gregory leaned forward. "That's not the point. The point is discipline. If others believe they can make catastrophic errors and still be rewarded with sympathy, what kind of culture does that create?" Richard raised a hand calmly. "It creates a culture of trust, Gregory. A culture where employees know they are valued as humans, not machines. That is the future of business." The room fell silent. Tension crackled in the air. Gregory's jaw tightened. "Not everyone agrees with your vision, Richard." Emily felt the weight of those words. She wasn't just fighting for her own survival anymore. She was caught in the middle of a philosophical war about the soul of the company itself. That night, unable to sleep, she sat on her balcony overlooking the city. The hum of traffic below was a distant murmur. She thought about everything Richard had done for her, the faith he had shown when no one else would. But she also thought about Gregory's words. Was he right? Had her mistake created a dangerous example? Would others grow careless, assuming mercy would always be granted? She shook her head. No, she couldn't let that narrative win. If she was to justify Richard's trust, she had to rise higher than ever before. She had to show not just that mistakes could be forgiven, but that they could fuel transformation. The next morning, Emily gathered her team. Her eyes shone with determination. "We're not just here to complete projects," she told them. "We're here to prove something bigger, that compassion and excellence can exist side by side. Let's raise the bar. Let's show them what happens when people work from a place of trust, not fear." Her words lit a fire in the room. The team leaned in, inspired. They began brainstorming new initiatives, new ideas, new strategies. They weren't just doing their jobs, they were innovating. Within weeks, Emily's department began producing results that surpassed expectations. Projects finished ahead of schedule. Client satisfaction ratings soared. Even Gregory couldn't ignore the numbers. But the conflict was far from over. Because Gregory wasn't just worried about performance. He was worried about power. And as Emily's influence grew, so did the threat she posed to his grip on the company's direction. Behind the scenes, he began laying a trap. One that would test not only Emily's resilience, but Richard's philosophy itself. And when that trap finally sprung, it would force everyone to confront a question far bigger than a decimal error. What matters more in a company profit at any cost, or people at the heart of it? The trap began quietly. Gregory didn't attack Emily head-on. He was too calculating for that. Instead, he worked in the shadows, planting seeds of doubt, waiting for the right moment to strike. He started with subtle whispers to board members. "Emily means well," he'd say, his tone dripping with feigned sympathy. "But let's be honest, she's only here because Richard protected her. That decimal error cost us credibility, and who's to say it won't happen again?" He drafted memos highlighting every minor delay in Emily's projects, blowing them out of proportion. He flagged routine budget adjustments as red flags and questioned her leadership in private conversations with investors. It wasn't about the truth, it was about perception. And Gregory knew that in business, perception could be more dangerous than reality. Meanwhile, Emily poured herself into her work, unaware of the storm building around her. Her department continued to thrive. She mentored new hires, introduced innovative workflows, and built stronger client relationships. Morale in her team was at an all-time high. But late one Friday afternoon, an email landed in her inbox that made her stomach sink. Subject line: "Urgent financial discrepancy detected." Emily clicked it open. The message claimed that a budget report from her department contained inconsistencies amounting to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Attached was a spreadsheet highlighting supposed errors in her team's accounting. Her heart raced. Could it be happening again? Had she missed something? She called in her finance liaison, Daniel, to review the file. He scanned the numbers, frowning deeply. "This doesn't make sense," he said. "We've double-checked these reports. The highlighted figures, they've been altered." Emily blinked. "Altered? By who?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "I don't know, but these aren't the numbers we submitted." A chill ran down Emily's spine. Someone was trying to frame her, and she had a sinking feeling she knew who. The following Monday, she was summoned to another board meeting. This time, the atmosphere was openly hostile. Gregory sat with a stack of printed reports in front of him, his face grim with self-righteous authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gregory began, "we have a serious issue. These discrepancies suggest either gross negligence or intentional misreporting within Emily Carter's department." Gasps filled the room. Emily's chest tightened, but she forced herself to speak. "That's not true. Those figures have been tampered with. My team's reports were accurate. I can prove it." Gregory raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Tampered with? Emily, are you suggesting sabotage? That's a bold claim." Richard leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Gregory, before we pass judgment, let's give Emily the chance to present her evidence." Emily's hands trembled slightly as she opened her laptop, projecting her team's original files onto the screen. Line by line, she showed the differences between her reports and the altered ones Gregory had presented. "These are the numbers we submitted," she said firmly. "And here is the metadata timestamp proving when they were filed. The discrepancies in Gregory's version do not match the official submission." A murmur rippled through the boardroom. Richard's gaze shifted to Gregory. "How did you come across these altered files?" Gregory cleared his throat, his composure faltering for the first time. "They were brought to my attention anonymously." "Convenient," Richard said, his voice cool. Emily's pulse thundered in her ears. This was her chance to turn the tables. If someone is planting false data, then the question we should be asking isn't about my integrity. It's about who benefits from discrediting me. The room fell into uneasy silence. All eyes flicked between Emily and Gregory. Richard broke the tension. "We will conduct a full investigation. Until then, Emily remains in her position." Emily exhaled shakily, relief washing over her, but only partially. She knew this wasn't over. Gregory wasn't the kind of man to retreat quietly. That evening, as she walked out of the office, Richard caught up with her in the lobby. "You handled yourself well today," he said, his tone calm but edged with concern. Emily forced a tired smile. "I'm trying, but it feels like no matter what I do, someone's waiting for me to slip." Richard nodded slowly. "That's because you've become a symbol. Gregory doesn't just see you as an employee. He sees you as proof that my vision can work or fail. And that makes you dangerous to him." Emily swallowed hard. "So what do I do?" Richard looked her straight in the eyes. "You do what you've always done. You stay true. Because in the end, truth always outlasts lies. Gregory may win battles, but if you keep standing, he can't win the war." Emily walked away with his words echoing in her heart. For the first time, she realized this wasn't just about her mistake anymore. It was about something much larger, a battle for the very soul of the company. And Gregory wasn't finished. His next move would push Emily to her absolute breaking point. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of Emily's career. She worked with her team to tighten every process, double-check every report, and document every action with precision. Yet she felt the invisible weight of scrutiny pressing down on her shoulders. Every move she made was watched. Every decision was second-guessed. Gregory's shadow lingered like a storm cloud, threatening to break at any moment. But if Gregory thought pressure would break her, he underestimated Emily's resolve. She rose earlier, prepared harder, and led her team with a steady hand. When doubt whispered in her ear late at night, she reminded herself of Richard's words, "Truth always outlasts lies." Still, she couldn't ignore the tension within the company. Rumors swirled through the halls. Some employees feared Gregory might succeed in ousting her. Others whispered that Richard's leadership was hanging in the balance. Harrison and Cole had become more than just a workplace. It was a battleground between two visions of leadership: fear versus trust. The breaking point came during the quarterly shareholders meeting. The grand conference hall buzzed with anticipation. Investors, analysts, and employees filled the seats, their eyes fixed on the stage where the company's future would be laid bare. Richard was scheduled to present the results of the quarter, results that, for the first time, would reflect the impact of his new policies. Emily sat among the audience, her heart pounding. She knew Gregory had been preparing his own narrative, ready to strike if the numbers fell short. The lights dimmed. Richard stepped onto the stage, calm and steady as always. He greeted the audience, then unveiled the quarterly report. At first, the numbers looked modest. Revenue growth had slowed compared to previous quarters. Gregory smirked from his seat, already preparing his rebuttal. But then Richard clicked to the next slide. Employee retention rates had soared. Productivity per team was higher than ever. Client satisfaction had reached record highs. Sick days had dropped dramatically. And the most surprising figure of all, overall profitability, though slightly delayed, was beginning to climb again, stronger and more sustainable than before. The room murmured with astonishment. Richard let the data sink in, then spoke. This company was built not only on innovation, but on people. We cannot demand loyalty if we treat people as disposable. Last quarter, we chose compassion. Some called it weakness, but the results speak for themselves. When employees feel valued, they give their best, and their best is worth more than fear could ever buy. The audience broke into applause. Emily felt tears sting her eyes. But Gregory wasn't finished. He stood abruptly, interrupting the applause. With all due respect, Richard, you're cherry-picking metrics. Yes, morale is up. Yes, retention is up. But what about long-term growth? What about the discipline that investors expect? One mistake nearly cost us $10 million, and the employee responsible still sits in this room. Are we really to believe this is the model of the future? The hall fell into tense silence. All eyes turned toward Richard. But before he could respond, Emily stood. Her knees shook, but her voice rang clear. "If I may," she said, addressing the audience. "Gregory is right about one thing. I made a mistake. A big one. One that could have cost this company dearly. And in most places, that would have been the end of my story. But Richard chose differently. He chose to see me as more than my worst moment. He gave me the chance to make it right. And because of that, I fought harder than I ever have in my life, not just for my job, but for the people around me." She paused, her voice catching slightly, then continued. "I've learned that fear drives people to hide mistakes, but trust gives people the courage to own them and fix them. That's why my team has thrived. That's why morale is soaring. That's why clients trust us. Not because we're perfect, but because we don't give up when we fall. We rise together." The room erupted into applause once more, louder this time. Investors leaned forward, nodding. Employees clapped until their hands stung. Gregory's face tightened, his argument collapsing under the weight of truth. Richard smiled and placed a hand over his heart. "That," he said, pointing toward Emily, "is why this company will outlast all the rest. Because when you invest in people, you invest in a future no balance sheet can measure." The standing ovation that followed was thunderous. In the weeks after the shareholders' meeting, Harrison and Cole became a case study in leadership circles. Business schools analyzed Richard's decision. Articles praised Emily's courage. Other companies began experimenting with similar policies, inspired by what they had seen. As for Gregory, his influence waned. His fixation on numbers without humanity made him seem outdated in a world hungry for authenticity. Eventually, he resigned, unable to reconcile his vision with the company's new direction. Emily, on the other hand, flourished. She was promoted to Director of Global Projects, entrusted with leading initiatives that would expand Harrison and Cole's reach across continents. She carried with her the lesson she had learned in the hardest way. Mistakes don't have to end a story sometimes. They begin a new chapter. One evening, months later, Emily found herself back in Richard's office. The sun had set, and the city skyline glittered outside the windows. She looked at him with gratitude in her eyes. "You changed my life," she said softly. Richard shook his head. "No, Emily, you changed this company. I just gave you the chance to show us how." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the hum of the city filling the background. And in that moment, Emily realized something profound. The true measure of leadership wasn't perfection or power or even profit. It was the courage to see people as more than their failures and the wisdom to believe that redemption could be the most valuable investment of all. When a beloved employee made a mistake, everyone expected punishment. Instead, the CEO chose compassion, and in doing so, he didn't just save a career. He transformed a company, a culture, and perhaps even the way we think about leadership itself. Because in the end, the greatest legacy of any leader isn't the numbers they leave behind, but the people they lift up along the way.